So continuing our discussion on vectors, let's talk about how do you create vectors. Create vectors in a lot of different ways. The first way is what I call direct entry, which is just entering the values in. So it's like the example I showed a little earlier. If I have vector A, and I'm using a capital variable name here, but if I have vector A equals 2, 5, 7, 1, 3. There you go. There's vector A. So I define it by doing direct entry. You also, MATLAB is smart enough that you don't need to put the commas in. You actually, if you put spaces in there, you could define your vector just by doing 2 space 5 space 7 space 1 space 3. It's just usually when I write it down to avoid confusion, I usually put the commas in. That way it's understood what the values are and you don't get them mixed up. So that's the direct entry way. Now, imagine if you were trying to create a vector. That's okay because there are only 5 values in that vector. But what if I'm trying to create a vector that's got 100 values in it, it's got 1,000 values in it, things like that. It may behoove me to have a different way to enter vectors. And so this next way is very important. You'll learn how to use this. It's called using a range, and using the range operator. And it has a couple of forms, but its general form is, so if I'm going to do vector B, its general form is I'm going to start off, and I don't need that bracket, sorry. I'm going to start off with 3 colon, well, that's the wrong way to start. Its basic form is start colon step colon stop. Okay? And so if I were going to do this, an example would be, okay, create a vector, B equals start at 0, step 2, stop at 10. That is the equivalent as if I had written 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Those are equivalent. This is a shorter way for me to do it. So if I wanted to do, let's say, vector C that had all the even values between 0 and 100, I would simply do 0 colon 2 colon 100. Okay? Now, this last value here may or may not be included. For example, let's say I did vector D and it was 0 colon 2 colon 11, right? Then that would be the same as writing 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, but I can't end on the 11 because I'm going to try to step 2. The next value would be 12, but 12 is past my end value or my stop value, so therefore I stop at 10. So this value here may or may not be included depending on how the step and the start work out. So that's the range operator. You can do a lot of different things with it. Let's go over here. Another example would be, let's say if I said vector E equaled start at 10, step -2, and end at -2, right? So this one would be equivalent to 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 0, -2, right? And so you can do a lot of interesting things here. There is a shortcut form of this range, where it's not a start stop, not a start step stop, but it is just a start colon stop. And what happens in this case is the step is assumed to be 1. And so if I just said f equals 0 colon 4, then that would be the equivalent of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because the step is assumed to be 1. And so this is a very common way to define vectors here. And so that's the range operator. Now I'm going to show some examples of how to create vectors with MATLAB. And once again, I'm going to do basically what I did just on the board and just sort of point out some features that go on in MATLAB. Let's do, and I know on the board I did capital letters for the variable names. It's just usually as a matter of example, but let me use lowercase here for variable names. And as I pointed out earlier in the series, that you should use lowercase in terms of your variable name. So let's do vector A, lowercase vector A equals 2, 5, 7, 1, 3. That's one way to create a vector. It's called doing it with direct entry. And so also let me point out here, I'm going to put some comments in there. You start off with the % sign, and I'll put direct entry. And the comments, once again, do not execute when the script or a function execute. They're just notes for humans to put in to help themselves understand what's going on. So there is vector A, and I will save this script. When I try to run it for the first time, it will save, and I will entitle this my vector intro. Okay. Then I want you to notice over here in the workspace, it ran it. I had a semicolon here, so it did not show up down here. That vector did not show up down here in the command window because this semicolon here suppressed it from doing so. But it did show up here in the workspace because we have variable A now, and it's assigned this value, and the value is a vector, and it's of type double. So it tells you that it is of class double, so there are numbers in there. So that's the simple way that you can direct entry a vector. And you could put any values in there. As I said on the board as well, you do not need the commas. You can do it this way, and it works just fine. Once again, it shows the commas here, but that's just to indicate that it's a vector. And over here, that's the vector A, and it has the values in it 2, 5, 7, 1, and 3. Also talked about another way to enter enter information to a vector, and that's using the range operator, which will have great importance as we go forward. So using the values that we used on the slide, let's define vector B, and keep in mind, let me do another comment here. We're going to do vector B, and keep in mind it's start colon step colon stop. So it's where you start your vector, how many units are between each item in the vector, and where you stop. And keep in mind, the stop value may not be included in the vector. So if I do vector B, and that equals 0 colon 2 colon 10, and I suppress the output, it's not going to show up down here, but it will show up over here. If you look, I just created the vector 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So that's the same as if I would have done B equals 2, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Same thing. So they're equivalent. It's just that this one, especially when you get very large vectors or even medium-sized vectors, it's just a lot easier to do it using the range if you can figure out a nice, clean way to do the range. Vector C equals, once again, a much larger vector, 2 colon to 100. Let me not suppress the output this time and run this. If you notice, it corrected columns 1 through 19, and then it shows columns 20 through 38. So those are all the elements in the vector, 0 all the way to 100. If I typed in 1,000,000, it would try to do 1,000,000. You noticed over here it got a little too big for it to show it, so it puts this notation in here. It says 1 by 5, 1 double. What that means is this has, it is a vector that is one row by 51 columns of doubles, and that's what this is. So it just got too big for it to put in here. So it indicates that by this. Likewise, suppress that on the next run. Likewise, I could do vector D, and that could equal 0 colon 2 colon 11. And when I do that, we're gonna wind up with the same thing we did when we had B. And the reason is because this 11 is not a full step of 2, and so it doesn't show up. And that's what I was talking about. The end value, the stop value, may not show up in the vector. Next up, it's possible to go backwards. So if we go from 10 and we step -2, we could have stepped -1, -3, doesn't matter. And we take it all the way to the value -2. So we'll stop at -2. We run that, and what we get is the vector 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 0, -2. Start at 10, stop at -2, and increment by -2 each time. There is a bit of a shortcut. If I only want to step 1 unit between each one, it sort of defaults to 1 unit. So if I did F equals 0 colon 4, then it's going to assume, since there are only 2 values here, that this is the start value, 0, and 4 is the stop value, and that there is no, then the step is just 1 step in between. And so when we run this, you get the value 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so that is those are 2 basic ways to create a vector, one with direct entry and one with the range operator. And we will see the range operator over and over again. So get used to what the colons are, and that it is start, step, stop.